The flames crackled hungrily as scraps of paper curled and blackened in the fire. 7-year-old Lena Carter, a small black girl with tear-streaked cheeks and trembling hands, fell to her knees in front of the roaring hearth. Her wide brown eyes reflected the burning edges of photographs, her mother's smile, her handwriting on fragile letters, all devoured by orange tongues of heat. "Please," she cried, her voice breaking as she reached desperately toward the blaze. "Those are my only pictures of Mommy." Standing over her, Rebecca, the girl's stepmother, smiled coldly, her jeweled fingers releasing another bundle of old letters into the fire. The papers fluttered down like broken wings before vanishing in smoke. "It's time you forgot about her," Rebecca sneered. "She's gone. I'm the only mother you need now." Lena sobbed, her small body shaking as she tried to snatch one half-burned page from the edge of the flames. Her fingertips stung with heat, but she didn't care. These weren't just papers. They were her last connection to the woman who had given her life. Rebecca's laughter filled the room, sharp and cruel. "Pathetic," she hissed. "Clinging to ghosts won't bring her back." She ground her heel against a photograph that had fallen to the floor, smearing soot across the face of the smiling woman captured in it. Lena lunged forward, trying to rescue the image, but Rebecca shoved her back with a force that knocked the breath out of her. The child's thin frame hit the carpet, her sobs muffled as she curled into herself. "Stop it," Lena wailed. "Please don't take her from me again." But Rebecca had no mercy. She lifted the wooden box that had once belonged to Lena's mother, the box that held all the letters, the keepsakes, the fragile fragments of a life lost too soon. Without hesitation, she tipped it forward, letting its contents cascade into the fire. The blaze roared higher, greedy flames swallowing every memory. Lena screamed, her cry raw, piercing. She crawled forward on her knees, reaching into the flames despite the searing heat. The acrid smell of burning paper filled her nose, choking her. Her hand brushed against a photograph half buried in ash, and she snatched it out, clutching it to her chest as her skin burned. Tears blurred her vision, but she held on. At that very moment, the front door swung open with a heavy thud. The scent of smoke drifted into the marble hallway, catching the attention of the man who had just returned from an early business trip. His polished shoes struck the floor in sharp, echoing steps as he followed the trail of burning air into the living room. And there he froze. The wealthy businessman, Lena's father, took in the scene with a single glance. His daughter on the floor, sobbing, clutching a singed photograph to her chest. His wife standing above her, tossing the last remnants of another woman's memory into the flames. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched. In that instant, he understood everything. "Rebecca," his voice boomed low and dangerous. "What have you done?" Rebecca flinched at the sound, the confident sneer slipping from her painted lips. For a fleeting second, she tried to mask her panic with indignation. "Darling, you're home early. I was only trying to help. She needs to move on. She can't live in the past forever." But the man's eyes, dark and furious, shifted to his daughter. Lena's sobs racked her body, her small fingers trembling as they clutched the half-burned picture tighter. She lifted her tear-streaked face toward him, her voice breaking. "Daddy, she's burning Mommy's things. Please make her stop." The room seemed to tremble with the weight of those words. Rebecca stepped back, her hand still clutching a charred letter, the edges crumbling between her manicured fingers. "She's manipulating you," she spat, her voice shrill. "That box of junk was poisoning her. I was saving her, saving both of us." But her excuses fell flat against the sound of Lena's weeping. The father's gaze was unyielding, cold as stone. He stepped forward, the firelight flickering across his face, highlighting the fury etched into every line. "You tried to erase her mother," he said, each word like a hammer striking iron. "You tried to erase my wife." Rebecca's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, searching for words. But the truth was already blazing in front of him, undeniable. And the sentence he was about to speak would shatter the silence, leaving everyone stunned, forever changing the fate of their family. The silence after Lena's plea was suffocating. The fire hissed and crackled in the hearth, the only sound filling the room as ashes drifted upward like gray snow. Lena clutched the half-burned photograph to her chest, her small fingers trembling, her breath hiccuping between sobs. Her father's tall frame blocked the doorway, his presence filling the room with a weight that made Rebecca's false confidence falter. His gaze, sharp as steel, cut through the smoke until it landed squarely on her. "Rebecca," he said again, his voice low, dangerous, each syllable vibrating with controlled fury. "What have you done?" Rebecca straightened, her jeweled necklace catching the firelight, trying to recover her poise. "I told you already," she said, forcing her voice to sound calm. "This child, your daughter, was drowning in the past. She clings to dead things, old scraps of paper and fading photographs. I was helping her let go. Helping you, too." Lena shook her head violently, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, Mommy's not dead if I can remember her. Those were mine. They were all I had left." She looked desperately at her father, her small voice cracking. "Daddy, please. Please don't let her take Mommy away from me." Her father's chest tightened at the sound of her voice. In Lena's words, he heard not only a child's grief, but years of pain bottled up, forced to hide under Rebecca's cold shadow. He stepped closer to the fire, his shadow stretching across the room. Rebecca tried to intercept him, holding out a hand as if to calm him. "Darling, listen." "Don't call me that," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "You set fire to the last memories of her mother, my wife, the woman whose place you thought you could steal." The words landed like blows. Rebecca's painted smile cracked, her eyes flashing with resentment. "You never let me in, did you?" she spat. "You always kept her ghost between us. I was never going to be enough for you no matter what I did. So yes, I burned her things, because I refused to live in a house haunted by another woman." Lena gasped, horrified, pressing the photograph tighter against her chest, as if shielding it from Rebecca's venom. Her father's fists clenched at his sides. "You refuse to live in this house?" His voice dropped to a growl. "Then don't. Pack your things. You're finished here." Rebecca's eyes widened, the words striking her like ice water. For the first time, fear flickered behind her mask of arrogance. You can't mean that. You're angry, but you'll calm down. Think about what you're saying." But his expression was unyielding. "I've thought about it for too long. While you tormented my daughter, while you chipped away at her spirit, while you tried to erase her mother's memory. I should have seen it sooner, but I see it now." Lena's sobs softened, her wide eyes fixed on her father, hope trembling in them like a fragile flame. Rebecca's desperation spilled out in a shrill cry. "She's manipulating you. She's just a child. She doesn't understand what's best for her. You'll regret this decision. I swear you will." Her father's jaw tightened. He bent down to Lena, gently lifting her into his arms. She clung to him instantly, burying her face in his shoulder, her tears soaking into his suit. He turned his gaze back to Rebecca, his eyes like fire. "The only thing I regret," he said coldly, "is ever letting you near my daughter." Rebecca staggered back, her face draining of color. The fire behind her flared as if echoing the finality of his words. For the first time since her mother's death, Lena felt safe. And for the first time since her father had remarried, Rebecca realized she had lost. The crackle of burning paper filled the silence, but in Lena's heart, something new began to stir. The certainty that her mother's memory would live on. Not because of photographs or letters alone, but because of love. Hers and her father's, unshakable and eternal. The fire in the hearth had begun to die down, its flames reduced to glowing embers, but the heat of the confrontation only grew fiercer. Lena clung to her father's chest, her small hands fisting the fabric of his suit as if it were the only thing anchoring her to safety. The faint smell of smoke clung to her hair, mingling with the salty trace of her tears. Rebecca stood frozen, her manicured fingers twitching at her side. For the first time since her marriage, she had lost control. Her husband's eyes, once warm, once forgiving, now blazed with a fury that stripped her of every excuse she tried to summon. "You don't understand," she said quickly, her voice trembling, though she tried to keep it steady. "This child manipulates you. Every time she cries, every time she clings to those old scraps, she keeps you chained to a dead woman. I burned them to free us, to make you see that I'm your wife now." Her words dripped with desperation, but they fell into the room like stones into a pit. Heavy, meaningless, sinking fast. His jaw tightened, his voice calm but cold as steel. "You didn't burn paper, Rebecca. You tried to burn her soul. You tried to erase the only connection my daughter has to her mother. That is unforgivable." Lena shifted slightly, her tear-streaked face pressing into his chest. She wanted to speak, to beg him not to believe Rebecca's lies. But his words already told her everything. He understood. Rebecca's lips curled into a bitter sneer. "So what now? You'll throw me out like trash? After everything I gave up to be here? After all the dinners, the parties, the face I showed the world for you?" "You didn't do those things for me," he said sharply, stepping forward. His voice filled the room like thunder. "You did them for yourself, for the power, the wealth, the image. But family, you never gave us that." Lena's heart pounded as she listened. Every word her father spoke felt like a shield placed around her, piece by piece. For so long she had felt small, powerless, like her voice didn't matter. But now it felt like the truth was finally being spoken out loud, echoing off the walls of the grand house. Rebecca's face twisted, her painted smile vanishing, replaced by raw anger. "She'll ruin you," she hissed, pointing a shaking finger at Lena. "That little brat will never let you forget your dead wife. You'll always be chained to the past." The father's fury erupted. He strode across the room, snatching the last unburned photograph from Rebecca's hand before she could toss it into the dying fire. He held it carefully, brushing soot from its edges, then placed it gently into Lena's small hands. "This is not the past," he declared, his voice resonating with authority. "This is memory. This is love. And it will never be destroyed." Lena clutched the photograph as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. Tears blurred her eyes, but this time they were mixed with relief. Her father saw her. He understood. He protected her. Rebecca backed away, her bravado collapsing. "You can't just end this," she stammered, her voice cracking. "I'm your wife. This house, this life, it's mine too." He turned on her, his voice thunderous. "Not anymore." The finality of his words hung in the air like a gavel striking in court. Rebecca's face drained of color. Her hands trembled as she realized she had lost everything. Lena lifted her head from her father's chest, her voice small but steady. "Daddy, please don't let her stay. I don't want her here." Her father kissed the top of her head, his voice softening for her ears alone. "She won't stay, sweetheart. I promise you that." Rebecca's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for something to hold on to, some argument, some excuse, some sliver of power. But there was nothing left. Only ashes on the hearth and a little girl's tear-stained face that she could never erase. The door to the grand living room stood open behind her, the hallway bathed in cold evening light. And for the first time, Rebecca realized that was her path. Not forward into this family, but backward into the emptiness she had come from. Her husband's final command sealed her fate. "Leave. Tonight." The silence after his words, "Leave. Tonight," was like a blade hanging in the air. The only sound came from the dying fire, its embers glowing faintly, as if ashamed to bear witness to the cruelty it had been forced to consume. Rebecca's face twisted, disbelief washing over her features. You can't be serious," she stammered, her voice high-pitched, almost hysterical. "After everything I've given you, after all the sacrifices I made to stand beside you, you're throwing me out? For her?" She jabbed a trembling finger toward Lena, who still clung to her father's chest like a bird terrified of losing its branch. He didn't flinch. His hand rested protectively on his daughter's back, his voice steady and unyielding. "No, Rebecca. I'm throwing you out because of you, because you showed me tonight what you truly are. A woman so consumed with jealousy that she would burn a child's memories just to feel powerful." Rebecca staggered back as if the words themselves had struck her. For years she had worn her wealth like armor, expensive dresses, glittering jewels, carefully rehearsed smiles at lavish dinners. But now, stripped of that illusion, she was simply a woman exposed, fragile, and desperate. "You'll regret this," she spat, her mask cracking into fury. "One day, you'll see that she'll never stop crying for that woman, never stop clinging to the past. And when she ruins you, don't come crawling back to me." Lena lifted her head just enough to meet Rebecca's glare. Her cheeks were wet, her small body still trembling, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of defiance. She tightened her grip on the charred photograph in her hand and whispered, barely audible but certain, "Mommy will never be gone, not as long as I remember her." The simple words landed like thunder in the room. For the first time, Lena's voice held power. Rebecca's eyes widened, her painted lips parting in shock. She looked from child to father and realized, with a sickening weight, that she no longer held any place between them. The father's voice cut through the silence, final and commanding. "Pack your things. You will leave this house before the night is over. If you refuse, I'll have security escort you out." Rebecca opened her mouth, then closed it again. The firelight flickered across her pale face, illuminating the rage and fear swirling inside her. She knew he meant it. For the first time, she had no power here. She spun on her heel, the click of her designer shoes sharp against the marble floor. As she stormed toward the grand staircase, her voice echoed back, shrill and venomous. "This isn't over. You'll see what you've lost when I'm gone." But her threats rang hollow. The father turned his attention back to Lena, lowering her gently onto the couch, away from the ashes. He cupped her small face in his hands, wiping away the tears with his thumbs. "It's over now, sweetheart. She won't hurt you again." Lena sniffled, her voice fragile. "Are you sure, Daddy? She won't come back?" He pulled her into a tight embrace, his heart aching at how much fear one little girl had been forced to carry. "I promise you, Lena, this is your home. No one will ever take it away from you, or your memories of your mother." Lena buried her face in his shoulder, clutching the photograph close. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt safe. The ashes in the fireplace no longer seemed like the end of her world, but the beginning of a new one. A world where her father stood unshakably by her side. Upstairs, the slam of a door and the sound of hurried footsteps signaled Rebecca's defeat. Suitcases scraped against the floor, drawers slammed shut. Her voice, shrieking in anger, faded as she descended the staircase once more, dragging her luggage behind her. She paused at the doorway, her eyes darting back to the living room where father and daughter sat together, wrapped in an embrace she could never penetrate. The sight burned her more deeply than the fire ever had, and with one last bitter glare, Rebecca disappeared into the night. The heavy door closed behind her with a final thud. Lena let out a shaky breath, as if releasing years of fear all at once. She looked up at her father, her small voice carrying more strength than he had ever heard from her. "She can't burn Mommy anymore." He smiled softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "No, sweetheart. Mommy lives here." He tapped her chest gently over her heart, and no one can ever take that away. The fire in the hearth sputtered, then died, leaving behind only ashes. But to Lena, it no longer felt like loss. It felt like survival. The heavy door had closed on Rebecca's departure, but the echoes of her cruelty still lingered in the house. The smell of smoke hung faintly in the air, a ghost of the fire that had devoured so many memories. Lena sat curled against her father on the couch, her small body exhausted from crying, her tiny fingers still gripping the half-burned photograph like a lifeline. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The crackle of the fire had gone silent, leaving only the soft hum of the night outside. Finally, Lena whispered, her voice small and fragile, "Daddy, is she really gone?" Her father tightened his arms around her, resting his chin on her hair. "Yes, sweetheart, she's gone, and she's never coming back." Lena's lips quivered, but she burned Mommy's letters. She burned almost everything. Fresh tears slipped down her cheeks. "Now I don't have her anymore." He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes, his gaze steady. "Listen to me, Lena. Your mother isn't in the ashes. She's here." He placed his hand gently over her small chest. "She's in your heart, in your smile, in the way you laugh. No fire can ever take that away. The words settled deep inside her, soothing some of the ache. She pressed the photograph closer, nodding slowly. The following days were quiet, but different. For the first time in years, the mansion didn't feel heavy with tension. No sharp heels clattered against the marble floors. No cutting remarks poisoned the air. The silence now belonged to peace. Lena and her father began spending evenings together, rebuilding what Rebecca had tried to tear down. He brought out albums hidden away in the attic, pictures he had carefully preserved from before. Together, they spread them across the dining table. Her mother's smile on a beach, her mother holding Lena as a baby, letters written in a graceful hand. Lena's eyes widened as she touched each one with reverence. "You still had these?" "Of course," he said softly. "I kept them safe. I knew one day you'd be ready to see them again." She traced her mother's face with her fingertip, tears glistening but not falling. For the first time, she felt that her mother's memory wasn't slipping away. It was alive, right here, shared between her and her father. As weeks passed, Lena's spirit began to heal. She laughed more, no longer weighed down by fear. She told her father stories about school, about friends, about dreams she'd been too scared to say out loud before. And he listened, truly listened, with a patience that made her feel seen. One evening she asked, "Daddy, do you think Mommy can see me?" He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I believe she can. And I believe she's proud of you, proud of how brave you've been." Lena smiled through misty eyes. "Then I'll keep being brave. For her." Together, they decided to honor her mother properly. They cleared a space in the garden, planting roses, her mother's favorite. On a wooden bench beside the flowers, they placed a small framed picture rescued from the attic. It became their special place, a sanctuary of memory and love. Lena visited often, sometimes with her father, sometimes alone. She would sit on the bench, whispering to her mother about her day, about the things that made her laugh, about the dreams she carried. And though the bench was silent, she felt less alone each time. Meanwhile, Rebecca's name was never spoken again. The rooms she once occupied were closed, her belongings sent away without ceremony. It was as if the house itself sighed in relief, cleansed of her venom. For Lena, each passing day was proof that the past could hurt, but it could also be survived. She no longer woke in fear of what would be taken from her. She no longer felt invisible. Her father had chosen her, defended her, and given her back the pieces of her mother she thought she had lost forever. And one night, as she drifted to sleep with the photograph of her mother beside her bed, she whispered softly, "Mommy, I'm safe now. Daddy's here, and you'll always be with me." The moonlight streamed gently through her window, falling across her peaceful face. And for the first time since tragedy had entered her life, Lena's dreams were not filled with loss, but with hope. The garden roses had begun to bloom. Their petals unfolded each morning like small flames of color, soft and delicate, yet full of life. Lena loved to sit on the wooden bench beside them, the framed picture of her mother resting gently on the stone pedestal nearby. For her, it wasn't just a bench or a patch of flowers. It was a sacred place, where the past and present held hands. Almost every day after school, she ran straight to the garden. Her little legs carried her quickly down the stone path, her curls bouncing with each step. She would sit on the bench, pull her knees close, and talk softly to the photograph. Sometimes she shared silly jokes from her classmates. Sometimes she admitted the things that scared her. And sometimes she simply sat in silence, feeling her mother's presence in the gentle sway of the roses. Her father often joined her. He would bring 2 cups of cocoa, handing one to her as he sat by her side. Together, they watched the sky change colors at dusk, the roses glowing red and pink against the setting sun. "Your mother would have loved this," he often said. "She always wanted a garden." Lena smiled, resting her head against his arm. "Now we have one. For her." Life inside the house changed too. Without Rebecca's constant bitterness, the air felt lighter. Meals were no longer filled with silence and sharp remarks. Instead, Lena and her father shared stories at the dinner table, laughter filling spaces that had once echoed with cruelty. Lena began to open up in ways she never had before. She told him about her dreams, to learn the piano like her mother once played, to paint the roses in the garden, to travel to the beach in her mother's photographs. Her father listened carefully, nodding, encouraging, promising that little by little they would make those dreams come true. And true to his word, he took her to piano lessons. At first, her small fingers fumbled across the keys, uncertain and shy. But with each week, the notes grew clearer, her confidence brighter. She loved the way the music carried her mother's memory, as if every melody was a bridge between them. Still, not everything was easy. Some nights Lena woke crying from nightmares. The fire, the image of Rebecca throwing her mother's letters into the flames. She clutched her blanket tightly, her chest heaving. But every time her father came quickly, sitting by her bed, smoothing her curls from her forehead. "You're safe," he whispered. "She can't hurt you anymore." Gradually, the nightmares faded. Her sleep grew calmer, and with each peaceful night, her healing deepened. One weekend, her father surprised her. He brought down a large wooden chest from the attic, dust clinging to its surface. "This," he said, setting it on the living room table, "belonged to your mother. I wanted to wait until you were ready." Lena's eyes widened as he opened it. Inside were treasures carefully preserved: her mother's scarf, soft and worn with time, a diary filled with neat handwriting, a silver locket holding a tiny photograph. She gasped, her hands hovering above the items as if afraid to touch them. "Daddy, it's like she's here." "She is," he said gently. "Every piece of this is part of her story. And it's your story, too." Lena picked up the locket, holding it tightly in her palm. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they didn't feel heavy. They felt warm, like rain watering the roses in their garden. From that day on, Lena carried the locket everywhere. She wore it at school, at lessons, even when she slept. It wasn't just jewelry, it was strength. When she touched it, she felt braver, stronger, as though her mother's hand was still holding hers. Her father noticed the change. The timid girl who once hid behind tears was blooming into someone confident, someone full of light. "You look more like your mother every day," he told her with a smile one evening, as she sat at the piano playing a melody she had composed herself. Lena beamed, her fingers dancing across the keys. "I think she can hear me." "I know she can," he replied softly. As the weeks stretched into months, the memory of Rebecca faded into little more than a shadow. Her threats, her cruelty, her attempts to erase the past, none of it held power anymore. What remained was love, between a father and his daughter, between a child and the memory of her mother, between the past and the future. And one evening, as Lena stood in the garden beneath a sky full of stars, she whispered into the night, "Thank you, Mommy, for giving me Daddy, for giving me love, for giving me hope." The roses swayed gently in the night breeze, as if answering her prayer. And for the first time, Lena knew with certainty that no fire, no cruelty, no jealousy could ever destroy what truly mattered. The seasons began to shift. The roses in the garden that Lena and her father had planted glowed with new life, their blossoms spreading across the yard in vibrant colors. For Lena, they weren't just flowers. They were living reminders that her mother's memory was still alive, blooming each day with the sunrise. Months had passed since Rebecca's departure, and the house had transformed with her absence. Once heavy with smoke, cruelty, and silence, it was now filled with music and laughter. Lena's piano melodies drifted down the hallways, notes full of hope and remembrance. Her father often stood quietly at the doorway, listening with a soft smile, his eyes shining with pride. Every evening, they returned to the garden bench. Sometimes Lena carried her diary, writing small notes to her mother. Other times she spoke aloud, her voice mingling with the rustle of the roses. "Mommy, I played a new song today," she whispered once, her locket glinting against her chest. "Daddy said I'm getting better. I think you would like it too." Her father would place an arm around her shoulders, nodding as though he, too, could hear the response carried on the wind. One spring afternoon, the family estate hosted a small gathering. Friends, neighbors, and charity members came to visit, many of whom had known Lena's mother. They marveled at how much Lena had grown, how she carried her mother's grace in her smile. She has her mother's spirit, one woman remarked, eyes glistening. Her father beamed, pulling Lena close. She does, and I'll make sure she never forgets where she came from. During the gathering, Lena performed at the piano for the first time, her small fingers pressing each key with care. The melody was simple but heartfelt, inspired by memories of her mother's lullabies. The room fell silent as the notes floated through the air, wrapping every listener in warmth. When she finished, there was a pause, then thunderous applause. Lena bowed shyly, her cheeks flushed, but her eyes sparkled with joy. For the first time, she felt not like a child who had lost, but like one who had found something worth carrying forward. That night, as the guests departed and the house returned to its quiet peace, Lena stood once more in the garden. The moonlight bathed the roses in silver light. She held her locket tightly, whispering into the night, "Mommy, I promise I'll always remember you. No one will ever take you away from me again, and I'll make you proud every single day." Her father approached, resting a hand on her shoulder. "She already is proud, Lena, and so am I." The little girl leaned against him, her small body finally free from the weight of fear. Together they stood in the garden, father and daughter, their hearts bound by love and memory. From that day on, Lena's life was no longer defined by loss. It was defined by strength, by the courage to protect what mattered, by the love of a father who had finally seen the truth, by the memory of a mother who would never fade. Rebecca's cruelty was reduced to ash, forgotten like the embers in the fireplace. But the bond between Lena and her father was unbreakable, shining brighter than any flame. And so, the story of Lena Carter, the little black girl who once cried out in desperation as her mother's photos burned, did not end in tragedy. It ended in love. Because though hatred can destroy, love always rebuilds. The night of the recital arrived like a promise. Weeks of practice had led to this moment, Lena's first performance outside the walls of her home. The charity that had once supported her family organized the event, dedicating it to children who had lost parents, yet carried their memory with strength. Lena stood backstage, her small hands trembling slightly against the fabric of her simple white dress. Around her neck hung the silver locket, its weight both comforting and empowering. She whispered softly, almost like a prayer, "Be with me, Mommy." Her father knelt beside her, adjusting the ribbon in her curls. His voice was calm but proud. "She's here, sweetheart, and so am I." When her name was called, Lena stepped out into the light. The hall fell quiet as she approached the piano, her small frame illuminated by the glow of chandeliers. She sat, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The melody floated gently, a mixture of sorrow and hope, woven together like the threads of her story. The notes carried memories of the fire, of tears, of photographs lost, but also of roses blooming, of laughter at the dinner table, of nights filled with safety. It was not just music, it was testimony. Tears welled in her father's eyes as he watched from the front row. He saw not the frightened child who once begged for her memories to be spared, but a strong, graceful girl who had transformed pain into beauty. When the final note faded, the silence in the hall lasted only a heartbeat before applause thundered through the room. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping their eyes. Lena bowed shyly, her cheeks flushed, but her smile radiant. Backstage, her father swept her into his arms, lifting her off the ground. "You were magnificent," he whispered. "Your mother would be so proud." Lena hugged him tightly, her locket pressed between them. "I felt her, Daddy. I really did." Life afterward settled into a rhythm of peace. The shadows Rebecca left behind grew fainter each day until they vanished completely. What remained was light, a garden full of roses, music echoing through the halls, and laughter spilling from the dinner table. Lena still visited the bench each evening, sometimes with her father, sometimes alone. But now her words to her mother were no longer desperate cries. They were updates, promises, dreams. "I'm happy now," she whispered one night, her curls swaying in the breeze. "I know you're watching, and I'll keep making you proud." The roses rustled softly, as if in reply. Years later, the house stood as a testament, not to wealth or grandeur, but to love's endurance. Visitors often remarked on the warmth of the place, the way it seemed alive with memory. They noticed the framed photographs proudly displayed, the piano always waiting for new melodies, the roses blooming in endless cycles. And at the center of it all was Lena, no longer the little girl who cried by the fire, but a young woman who carried her mother's spirit with grace. Her father, always by her side, knew that though tragedy had once tried to tear them apart, it had instead bound them together stronger than ever, because the fire that sought to destroy had failed. Love had endured, and in the end, love had won.